During the winter campaigns of World War II, more soldiers died from cold than from enemy bullets. But here's what the casualty reports don't tell you. The ones who died weren't always the ones caught in the open. Some froze to death inside the shelters they built with their own hands. 3 critical mistakes, repeated across every frozen battlefield from the Eastern Front to the Ardennes, turned survival shelters into frozen tombs. And if you think building a snow hole is just about digging and staying warm, what I'm about to show you from actual military survival doctrine could save your life in a winter emergency. Because the difference between the soldiers who walked out at dawn and the ones who didn't came down to knowledge most people still get completely wrong today. Let's start with something that defies logic. Most soldiers who died in emergency snow shelters didn't freeze from lack of warmth. They died from moisture. When you're exhausted, stressed, and working hard to dig a shelter, you sweat. That moisture has nowhere to go inside your wool uniform and cotton layers. In a confined snow hole, condensation forms on every surface. Your clothing absorbs it, and over 6 to 8 hours, that dampness becomes a thermal drain your body can't recover from. German infantry learned this the hard way on the Eastern Front. Soldiers would dig frantically to escape the wind, seal themselves into their snow holes, and feel immediate relief from the cutting cold. But by morning, the ones who survived remembered pulling frozen uniforms off the ones who didn't. The clothing was stiff with ice. The bodies showed signs of hypothermia despite being sheltered from the wind. The moisture they generated trying to stay warm had killed them. This is the first fatal mistake, treating your snow shelter like a sealed bunker. Military cold weather doctrine drilled one principle into every soldier: manage moisture or die. You need ventilation, even when every instinct screams to seal out the cold. A single fist-sized hole at the apex of your shelter vents carbon dioxide and moisture while maintaining your thermal pocket. No hole means carbon dioxide buildup, which makes you drowsy. You fall asleep thinking you're just tired, and you don't wake up. Too many holes and you lose all your heat. One hole, fist-sized, at the highest point. That's the doctrine that kept soldiers alive.
But here's what separates battlefield survival from civilian camping: the psychological warfare that happens inside your own mind when you're alone in a snow hole at night. Military psychiatrists documented a phenomenon they called shelter abandonment syndrome. It happened most often between 2 and 4 in the morning. A soldier would be lying in a snow hole, listening to distant artillery, cold despite his best efforts, and his brain would start lying to him. It would tell him the shelter wasn't working. It would tell him he'd be warmer if he kept moving. It would convince him that staying here was giving up, and if he just pushed through to find his unit or a better position, he'd be fine. Soldiers listened to that voice. They crawled out of perfectly functional shelters and died of exposure within hours. Search teams would find them half a mile away from snow holes that would have kept them alive until dawn. This wasn't cowardice or stupidity. This was the brain under stress and mild hypothermia losing its ability to think rationally. German infantry discipline addressed this directly. You commit to staying in your shelter unless you have objective evidence of failure. Not feelings, not anxiety. Objective evidence like water flooding your space, structural collapse, or enemy discovery. Anything else is fear-talking, and fear kills more soldiers than bullets in winter warfare. The other psychological trap was overconfidence. Veterans who'd survived previous winters sometimes died because they rushed construction, skipped ventilation checks, or didn't monitor moisture buildup. They assumed their experience would carry them through. But winter doesn't care about your previous successes. It cares about what you do right now, in this moment, with this specific snow condition and this specific shelter.
You might think this is just historical battlefield trivia, but these exact scenarios play out every winter in civilian contexts. Backcountry skiers get separated from their groups. Winter drivers break down on remote mountain passes. Day hikers get caught in unexpected storms. The techniques that kept infantry alive in the worst conditions in human history work exactly the same way today. The difference between tragedy and survival often comes down to whether someone knows these three principles: manage moisture through proper ventilation, build entrance tunnels that slope downward to create thermal stratification, and keep shelter volume minimal to maximize heat retention. Modern survival gear helps: emergency blankets, chemical heat packs, proper winter clothing. But gear creates a dangerous psychological dependency. People convince themselves that because they have equipment, they don't need knowledge. Then their equipment fails, gets lost, or simply isn't enough for the conditions they're facing. Knowledge doesn't fail. Knowledge doesn't run out of batteries. Knowledge adapts to whatever resources you actually have available. Military cold weather philosophy flips conventional survival thinking. Gear is a supplement to knowledge, not a replacement for it. If you can build a functional snow shelter with nothing but your hands and maybe a cooking pot for digging, then having a shovel and a space blanket just makes you faster and more efficient. But if you've never practiced the core technique, all the gear in the world just gives you more tools to make the same fatal mistakes with.
Here's the reality that military survival training confronts directly. You cannot learn this from videos alone. Knowledge and capability are not the same thing. Soldiers practiced building snow shelters in training conditions specifically so they'd have muscle memory and decision-making patterns when it actually mattered. The training progression is simple, but not easy. First, practice in controlled conditions, when weather is manageable and you have backup. Build a snow shelter from scratch, not a snow cave in a massive natural drift. Build one from accumulated snow using proper technique. Spend time inside it. Discover that everything is harder than it sounds. Digging is exhausting. Dimensions are difficult to judge. Ventilation placement isn't obvious. Second, practice with degraded capacity. Go out when you're already cold. Limit your tools. Give yourself time constraints. This simulates actual emergency conditions because you won't be fresh and energized when it really matters. You'll be compromised, and your technique needs to function at 60% capacity. Third, and this is the step most people skip, spend a full night in a shelter you've built. Not in your backyard where you can bail out to your house, in an actual winter environment. This is where you learn the psychological elements, the silence, the claustrophobia, the way your mind plays tricks on you at 3 in the morning. Reading about this teaches you nothing. Experiencing it directly teaches you everything.
This isn't about becoming some hardcore survivalist, preparing for extreme scenarios. This is about respecting winter enough to understand that cold extracts heat from your body at a predictable rate, and snow, when used correctly, can reverse that equation in your favor. The soldiers who survived brutal winter campaigns weren't the strongest or the best equipped. They were the ones who made disciplined decisions based on principles they understood. They built their shelters correctly. They managed moisture. They controlled their psychology. They didn't fight the environment, they used it. Survival knowledge expires through lack of use. You can watch every video and read every manual and still fail completely when it matters, because knowing about something and being able to do something are not the same thing. Find a winter weekend, get uncomfortable, build the shelter, sleep in it. Make your mistakes now when they're just lessons instead of casualties. If this kind of battlefield-tested survival knowledge matters to you, hit subscribe to Warfield Survival. Drop a comment with which World War II survival technique you want decoded next, and share this with anyone who understands that real survival knowledge isn't entertainment. It's insurance you hope you never need, but can't afford to be without. The soldiers who learned these lessons paid with their lives so we could learn from their experience. Don't waste that knowledge.